The silence of awake speaks louder than any words. The muffled sound of shoes on the cold floor, the restrained weeping, the gazes that avoid each other, all waiting for the moment when my letter would be read. The letter I left for them. The letter they never expected to exist. I knew them all too well. He knew they would arrive with weary faces, impeccably dressed in black and rehearsed tears. That they would approach my coffin as if it were a mirror of their own lies. And that they would feign sadness while calculating what would remain for each of them. That's why I wrote. Because sometimes, the only way to be heard is after the world stops expecting your voice. Until the last day of my life, I was the woman who served the coffee, who cleaned up the crumbs, who said everything's fine when nothing was right. What others called strong, simply because it endured in silence. But no one imagined how much that silence held. It was my last secret, and the most powerful. The church was full. Familiar faces. Old whispers. My eldest daughter, sitting in the front row, held a handkerchief she didn't use. My youngest son, restless, glanced at his watch every minute, as if even my death were an inconvenience on his agenda. And my daughter-in-law, the most deceitful of them all, maintained her usual smile, the one she'd learned to use as a shield. When the pastor announced that there was a letter left by me, the air changed. Some exchanged glances. Others pretended not to hear. And, for a brief moment, even the crying ceased. Death has that power. It interrupts the theater. In the first line of the letter, I didn't ask for forgiveness. I asked for silence. And it was there that the first whisper of regret began to form between them. Because nothing is more frightening than realizing that the person you tried to erase still had a voice waiting for the right moment to be heard. As the pastor read, a shiver ran through the room. My secrets, my truths, my pain, everything I had hidden my whole life, took shape and weight before those who judged me, betrayed me, and diminished me. I wrote each word calmly, like someone sharpening a blade. And, with each sentence, they saw themselves reflected, ugly, small, exposed. The sound of the paper being turned sounded like thunder amidst the morning. No one breathed deeply. No one dared to interrupt. Because, even in death, I kept them silent. And deep down, that's what I always wanted, for them to hear me. For the first time, to listen without interrupting me. With each revelation, the weight of my words grew. It was the truth rising from the grave along with me. A truth that, while I was alive, they called drama, too sensitive, old lady mania. But there, in that temple covered in flowers and pretense, there was no denying it anymore. Death had given me the power that life never allowed me. And while the wind swayed the curtains and the candles trembled, a question echoed within them, and perhaps within you as well. What happens when the person you underestimated writes the last word of their own story? Because that's exactly what I did. I wrote my own ending. And they were never the same after hearing it. When I began writing that letter, the house was still full of life. The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway, the television on in the living room, the smell of coffee mingling with expensive perfume. I was the center of the house, but not of attention. I was the figure who supported, who listened, who softened the shocks. They saw me, but they didn't truly see me. And perhaps that's why I decided to write. Because there are truths that can only be told when there's no one else to interrupt. I remember the exact moment I realized my presence had become invisible. It was at a Sunday dinner. The table was laden with food, the laughter loud, and yet, my silence seemed the only guest. They talked about business, travel, plans that didn't include me. Each sentence spoken without my name was like a slice of time being ripped away from me. Until one of them, with a cutting smile, said, "Mom, you should rest, not get involved in these things anymore." That was the beginning of my disappearance. Slow, polished, cruel. That night, I sat alone at the table when everyone was asleep. The clock was almost midnight, and the sound of the wind coming in through the window was the only thing that answered me. I picked up an old notebook with a blue cover and began to write. The first lines came out trembling, like someone afraid of their own thoughts. Then they came with force. I didn't know I was writing my final letter, but I felt I needed to record what time and neglect had erased. I wrote about what I lived through, but also about what I endured. About the small humiliations hidden behind polite laughter. About racism disguised as well-intentioned advice. You should dress more neutrally, to appear more elegant, they would say. Elegant, for them, meant invisible. And I obeyed for a long time, believing that modesty was the same as respect. But the respect that comes from erasure is not respect. It's fear disguised as admiration. As I wrote, I realized that each word was a return. Of everything they took from me, of everything they said I wasn't. The dark ink on the paper seemed to pulse. It was as if the pages breathed along with me. The house slept, but I was reborn there, among phrases, among memories, among wounds that finally found a name. As the days passed, the letter grew. It wasn't just a venting of feelings, it was a mirror. And what I saw reflected there wasn't the woman they tried to mold. It was the woman I hid so as not to disappoint them. The woman who once believed that love and submission were the same thing. I wrote about the moments when I was silenced, not with shouts, but with stares. When they talked over me in conversations, when they used my name as a trophy and yet left me out of decisions. With each memory, a truth took shape. And the more I wrote, the more I understood that this letter would not be a lament, but an inheritance, not of possessions, but of conscience. There were nights when I thought about tearing it up. I thought maybe it would be better to let it all fade into oblivion. But then, I remembered the times I was forced to smile in the face of injustice. The day I heard a daughter-in-law say, thinking I wasn't listening, that at least his mother was a classy black woman. The word classy hurt more than black. Because class, there, was the polite synonym for limit. It was at that point that I realized my letter wasn't a farewell. It was a return. A way of saying everything that had been denied to me. And, deep down, I knew it would be read when I was no longer here, because that's how it always happens with the truth. People only hear it when it's too late. Today, when I think of that piece of paper tucked away at the bottom of the drawer, I feel it's more alive than many who are still breathing. And perhaps that's why so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation, because they know that certain stories don't die with those who live them. They continue, waiting for the right moment to be heard. And my moment was coming. Because a letter written in silence carries a power that not even time can erase. And when the first paragraph was read at my funeral, I finally came back to life. As the letter grew, so did I. Each memory I wrote left a different mark, as if the paper were sucking from me what life never wanted to hear. And the more I wrote, the clearer the truth became. I wasn't just telling a story, I was leaving evidence. Evidence of what they did, what they said, what they tried to erase. The weight of the words began to disturb the air in the house. It was as if the walls could listen. Sometimes, I would wake up in the middle of the night and hear the sound of the pen scratching on the paper, even before I had gotten out of bed. Writing was no longer a choice. It was a calling, a force that came from within, asking me to say what so many women before me had swallowed in silence. One afternoon, while I was ironing, I heard my name being called on the balcony. They spoke softly, but not loudly enough. "She doesn't understand things anymore," my daughter said. "We'd better settle the probate quickly." The iron almost fell from my hand. The sound of steam escaping from the metal drowned out what remained of the conversation, but the meaning was already clear. They weren't waiting for my death. They were planning around it. From that day forward, everything changed. Affection turned into excessive concern. Smiles came with disguised questions. And visits began to have a set end time. At first, I wanted to believe it was concern. But I soon realized it wasn't love, it was strategy. The old story, treating mature black women as fragile, confused, outdated, all to justify control. I started keeping little things, like someone hiding jewels. Copies of documents, receipts, old photographs, letters I had written myself decades ago. Each item seemed to whisper a part of my story, asking to be preserved. And, little by little, I realized that my letter would not only be a venting of feelings, but a reckoning. A reckoning between what I lived and what they let me live. At night, I would write at the kitchen table. The ticking of the clock mingled with the distant noise of cars. There was something sacred about that ritual. The pen seemed to understand what my voice never dared to say. And when I wrote their names, one by one, I felt a mixture of pain and power. It was as if, finally, I was putting the world back in its place, not for revenge, but for justice. The dim light of the lamp illuminated the wrinkles on my hands, and I realized how much more they told me than any photograph. Each line was a story, each callus a secret, and as the ink dripped onto the paper, I thought, if they call me old, it's because they haven't yet learned what age teaches. The following days were filled with tense calm. I spoke little, but I saw everything. The way they hid their conversations, the long pauses when I entered the room, the glances exchanged over my shoulder. They thought I didn't notice. They thought time had slowed me down. Little did they know that it was time that taught me to see in the dark. I started planning the right moment. I didn't want a fight. I wanted a testimony. And that's when I understood that the letter wouldn't be delivered while I was alive. It would be my last gesture, my last act of power. The kind of gesture that can't be interrupted, nor contested. An act that can only be heard when there's no way to respond anymore. Sometimes I would look in the mirror and wonder if I was ready. The reflection would show me a face that didn't tremble. A face that had already loved, cried, forgiven, but that now only wanted to be remembered. The fear that once silenced me was now my ally. Because nothing is stronger than someone who has lost everything and still chooses the truth. And it was with this certainty that I sealed the envelope. A simple piece of paper, but with the weight of a lifetime. I kept it in the deepest drawer of the closet, among fabrics and perfumes. And as I folded it for the last time, a feeling swept through me like a cold wind. When this letter is read, no one will come out unscathed. Not them. Not me. But perhaps, for the first time, the truth will breathe. I kept the letter for months, maybe years. Sometimes I would take it out of the drawer and reread each line, like someone revisiting a mirror. There was pain there, yes, but there was also beauty. The beauty of finally recognizing myself without needing to ask permission. I used to think that growing old was the same as losing relevance, until I realized that time doesn't diminish us, it only refines us. It's like gold. The purer it is, the more discreet, the harder it is to bend. There were afternoons when the weight of what I knew seemed overwhelming. The smell of the house, the sound of the birds in the yard, everything remained the same, but inside I no longer belonged there. I walked through the rooms like a visitor in my own life. Each photo on the wall told a different lie, rehearsed smiles, hugs that I now knew concealed calculation. Sometimes, I would stop in front of one of them and ask myself, at what point did love turn into a competition? I found myself observing the world outside more. The women in the neighborhood, the neighbors with calloused hands and tired eyes, all carrying stories that no one asked about. Once, I met Dona Clarice, who whispered to me, "We learn to be silent to survive, but silence also makes us sick." That phrase stuck inside me like a seed. It was then that I realized, my letter wasn't just mine. It was also the voice of all the women who never had the chance to write their own truth. Sometimes I dreamt that I was alive while reading. I saw my children sitting on the church pew, each trying to decipher what they felt. Some ashamed, others angry. But in the dream, what moved me wasn't their regret, it was their relief. The relief of finally letting the weight of appearances fall to the ground. Their mask and mine. I began to imagine the day of my funeral, not as a tragedy, but as a final scene. A stage where their silence would be the audience and my voice, the protagonist. I saw the simple coffin, the white flowers, the distant murmur of prayers. And in the middle of it all, an envelope on the altar. That envelope, my last presence in the world of the living. It was strange to feel peace when thinking about my own departure. But I realized there was something liberating in knowing that, one day, my words would speak for me. That the love they denied, the respect they took from me, and the strength they hid behind age would finally rise up, and do so publicly. Life has taught me that dignity is a form of silent revenge. And that time, even when it seems cruel, is the fairest judge of all. What is hidden flourishes, sooner or later, before those who pretended not to see. And perhaps that is why so many who hear stories like mine feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent sign that the message touched them, because they know what it is to be forgotten and yet remain whole. One night, as the wind blew through the cracks in the window, I felt something inside me change. There was no longer any resentment, only purpose. I wanted them to know what they had done, but I also wanted them to understand what they had lost. To see how much the love they never knew how to reciprocate cost. I picked up the letter once more. I read it slowly, feeling the sound of each word inside me. And I realized there was nothing to add, nothing to take away. It was complete, as if it had waited for the right time to be born. I adjusted the envelope and placed it inside a wooden box, along with the necklace I inherited from my mother. I closed it carefully, as if sealing a destiny. And in that instant, a profound calm took hold of me. Still, there was something I couldn't explain. A slight premonition, like the air before the rain. Something told me that when this letter was read, the silence wouldn't end there. It would multiply. Because certain truths, when they come to light, not only liberate, they forever transform those who hear them. Over time, the letter ceased to be just a secret. It became a presence. I felt it in every corner of the house, as if the paper breathed along with me. Sometimes, when the wind came in through the window and moved the curtains, I swore I heard the sound of the envelope opening, the light rustling of the pages, as if the words had a life of their own. It was as if it already knew the destiny that awaited it, and was just waiting for the right moment. The days passed slowly, and I began to see the world differently. Small things took on a new meaning. The smell of coffee, the touch of light on the old wood of the table, the sound of the gate closing at dusk. Every detail seemed to prepare me for departure, not with fear, but with acceptance. Death, when faced head-on, ceases to be a threat. It becomes an ally, a messenger carrying what could not be said in life. I started writing short notes, without signatures. Little messages left in strategic places. One inside my grandson's favorite book. Another, folded and kept in my daughter's jewelry box. None of them spoke of pain, only of remembrance. Because forgetting, I learned, is true death. And I refused to be forgotten. At night, I would sit in the darkness of the room and watch the house fall asleep. The clock ticked away with its usual calm, but inside me, something was speeding up. It was the feeling that the story was moving forward, even though I was still standing still. At certain moments, fear would creep in, not of death, but of the reaction. I wondered, when they hear my words, will they understand? Or will they hate even more for having been unmasked by a woman who can no longer be confronted? Doubt followed me like a shadow. But even fear had its role. It reminded me of the value of what I was about to do. Because only those who fear loss know exactly what is at stake. One day, I woke up with the sun streaming through the window and felt a different kind of certainty. The air felt light, almost new. I took the box containing the envelope and the necklace and gave them to the woman who looked after the house. A simple but trustworthy woman who always treated me with respect. When the time is right, I said, give this to my eldest daughter. And don't say anything. She nodded, without asking any questions. In her eyes, I saw a silent understanding, the kind of understanding only someone who has once been invisible can have. In the following days, I began to say goodbye to things without anyone noticing. I touched the curtains I had sewn by hand. I ran my fingers over the old photographs. I caressed the necklace one last time. And I realized that life is made of these small gestures. It is in them that love hides. One night, while the wind blew outside, I felt a tightness in my chest. It wasn't pain, it was peace. A sweet weariness, like that of someone who has accomplished what they came to do. I lay down on the bed and thought, now the letter is theirs. And I fell asleep. The rest, I learned later, from the voices that echoed around me. The day of the wake arrived gray, smelling of withered flowers and muffled murmurs. They say the church was full. That my daughter, with trembling hands, opened the box and found the envelope with my name. That, for a moment, everyone stood still, as if time had stopped to listen. The pastor's voice read the words aloud. Each word sounded slow, heavy, alive. And with each phrase, a piece of me resurfaced. My voice, which had been silenced so many times in life, now filled the space between the pews. And as the echo spread through the cold walls, many lowered their heads, not out of respect, but out of shame. They say there was a moment when no one breathed anymore. A moment of pure reflection, where everyone had to look at what they had done. But the letter wasn't finished yet. The ending, the one that held the deepest blow, was still waiting to be revealed. And what would come next would forever change the way they would remember me. They say the silence that filled the room at that moment wasn't one of mourning, but of astonishment. My letter began softly, as if it were a plea for forgiveness. The first words spoke of love, of care, of a life dedicated to keeping everyone together. It was the tone of someone bidding farewell with tenderness, and for a few minutes, they believed that would be all, a final sweet gesture from a woman who had endured too much. But then, the third page changed everything. The firm, almost grave handwriting began to recount what no one expected to hear. I described conversations, dates, carelessly spoken phrases, promises broken in silence. Each line was a memory returned with surgical precision. With each paragraph, a layer of their pretense crumbled. It wasn't revenge, it was testimony. And each word written not to hurt, but to remind, what is denied to the truth, time always exacts its toll. Some tried to interrupt the reading, they say. A murmur, an attempt to snatch the paper from the pastor's hands. But he continued, impassive. His voice was serene, almost solemn, and the more he read, the heavier the air seemed. The church walls, covered in flowers, began to seem too small to contain that thick silence. It was as if each flower absorbed the shame of the atmosphere, blossoming with sadness instead of color. My youngest daughter, the one who had so often treated me with impatience, couldn't lift her eyes. They say she was trembling. My son, the proudest of them all, kept his face rigid, but his jaw betrayed the effort to remain firm. I had foreseen this reaction, the discomfort of those who never got used to hearing me. In life, my voice was always cut off mid-sentence. Now, it echoed in its entirety. The letter also spoke of love. A misunderstood love, given entirely, but received with calculation. I spoke of what it is to be a black woman in a family that has learned to love halfway. That praises strength, but cannot tolerate firmness. That applauds resilience, but fears the truth. I spoke of the loneliness that comes from being necessary, but never celebrated. And when the pastor read these words, a sob escaped someone in the background. A brief sound, but enough to break everyone's composure. The contrast between love and disillusionment created a tension that seemed alive. They say the sun streamed through the window just as my daughter-in-law's name was mentioned. A beam of golden light crossed the room, illuminating the paper in the pastor's hands. It was as if life itself wanted to witness it. And, for a moment, what was heavy hung in the air, a fragile balance between guilt and liberation. The letter continued, revealing that I knew about every decision made in secret. About the accounts in my name, the documents exchanged, the lies told in a protective tone. I described everything calmly, without resentment. Just facts. Each sentence ended with a kind of silence that spoke louder than any accusation. It was a narrative without shouting, but with the power of thunder. Some were crying, others stared blankly at the floor. But no one left. Because, even if they wanted to, they couldn't. It was too late. The time they had stolen from me now compelled them to listen until the end. And when the pastor reached the last part of the reading, the most intimate, the most unexpected, everyone held their breath. The tone changed again. I spoke of redemption. Not for them, but for myself. I spoke of forgiveness that is not forgetting, but liberation. And of how death did not take away my power, it only gave me a voice. The wind blew strongly outside, and the sails fluttered. Some swore they felt a presence. Others, a slight shiver down their spines. But no one dared to comment. The letter was not yet finished, and the silence was no longer one of pain, it was one of revelation. Something greater was approaching. Something that could no longer be contained. After the last word of the letter was read, the silence didn't end. It lingered, hovering over each one like a shadow that refuses to dissipate. The pastor's voice ceased, but the echo of my words continued. They say the sound seemed to come from the walls, the floor, perhaps even the air itself. As if I were still present, not in body, but in their memory. Because when the truth is told, it doesn't disappear. It settles in, grows, and transforms everything around it. The reaction was slow, almost imperceptible at first. My son, the same one who always spoke with authority, now seemed smaller. His hand trembled on his knee, his gaze lost on the floor. My eldest daughter wiped away tears with a crumpled handkerchief, repeating in a low voice, she knew everything. My daughter-in-law, who always sized me up with the eyes of someone who feels superior, kept her face held high, but the color had drained from her face. Everyone was naked, without the veneer of good manners, without the disguise of morality. It was as if, finally, they saw themselves in the mirror I had left behind. Outside, life went on. People passed by on the street, cars honked, the sun still shone, indifferent. But inside that church, time seemed different. The flowers withered slowly, the sweet scent began to become cloying, and each breath weighed heavily. It was the price of conscience. The letter, they say, remained in the pastor's hands until the end, like a sacred testament. And when he finished reading, the look he cast at the family was one of something deeper than judgment. It was understanding. He himself seemed to have been touched by something greater, by that silent force that exists when someone speaks the truth with a pure heart. In the following days, the letter became the talk of the town. Part of the neighborhood whispered about it, part pretended not to know. Some called me brave, others cruel. But those who have lived with the weight of silence understand, courage and justice sometimes have the same face. People knew me, but only now were they listening to me. My name, once pronounced carelessly, began to be said with care. Dona Eunice, they would say, with a new, almost belated kind of respect. The same name that, in life, many forgot to call me. And it's curious to think how death makes certain truths finally take on the tone they should have had in life. Within the family, the effect was devastating. Accounts were reviewed, promises remembered, resentments exposed. They tried to deny what they heard, but the letter was too much proof. It was impossible to pretend. The truth, once released, can no longer be contained within silence. Some began to change, perhaps out of regret or fear of facing the gaze of others. But somehow each of them was transformed. The eldest daughter began to visit the cemetery every week. I would carry simple flowers, the same ones I liked, and sit there for hours, perhaps hoping to hear my voice. The son, more proud, never went. But, discreetly, he paid off the debts incurred in my name. A belated gesture, but a gesture nonetheless. And some say the letter continues to pass from hand to hand. That some neighbors ask to read it. That young women copy it into notebooks, as if each line were a prayer, a reminder that no one should allow their history to be erased. It's curious how words have this power to continue existing, even when the one who wrote them is gone. Perhaps that's why, even today, those who hear this story feel something difficult to explain. A tightness, a memory, a desire to say what has never been said. It's as if my letter left doors open within each of them. And perhaps that's why many, upon reaching this point, feel the urge to share what they felt. Because there are truths that don't want to be kept, they want to echo. And it is in this echo that I remain. Neither alive nor dead, but present. In every regret, in every gesture of reconciliation, in every woman who decides to write her own letter before the world silences her. But even now, something tells me there is still more. Because my story didn't end with the reading. It only began when everyone, finally, was left speechless. The weeks following the reading were like an echo that refused to die. Even when the morning officially ended, the house remained silent. The voices, once full of authority, became whispers. The laughter, which had once sounded like triumph, now seemed like discomfort. The letter had stirred something deeper than pride. It had unearthed what lay dormant in each of them. My eldest daughter, they say, began to wander around the house as if searching for answers in the walls. She touched the picture frames, opened drawers, sat in the armchair where I used to read. Sometimes, she would spend hours in front of the window, looking at the garden she never tended to, but which now seemed a mirror of everything she had let wither. My son, on the other hand, ran away. He avoided the house, avoided the subject, avoided himself. Because shame is heavier than guilt, it cannot be confessed, only carried. And the world outside watched. Some commented with admiration, others with unease. She was too brave, they said. But was it necessary to go that far? That question echoed, and I smiled, even from where I was. Because the world always tries to measure the pain of others. And it always thinks that exposing the truth is an exaggeration, when, in fact, it's about survival. The letter began to spread. Someone copied it and posted it on a local network. The text multiplied, was read in women's groups, at church meetings, in conversation circles. Each reading gained a new meaning. For some, it was a story of justice. For others, a reminder that dignity is not demanded, it is asserted. There were those who said that, for the first time, they felt the urge to write as well. To tell their own version of the pain that time tried to erase. In that simple gesture, writing, keeping, revealing, I had planted a seed. A silent revolution, made of paper and courage. And even if they, my family, tried to follow, nothing would ever be the same again. Because there's no going back to the comfort of lies after the truth shines its light. But the consequences also came in the form of rupture. The youngest daughter cut off contact with her brother. She said she couldn't bear the weight of being with someone who had lived denying what he knew. The daughter-in-law sold the house and moved away, taking with her the look of someone who had lost something more precious than money, control. And yet, there was hope. In the midst of the ruin, a new space began to open up. One morning, my granddaughter, the youngest, with curious eyes and a serene voice, found a second envelope, forgotten inside an old book. It was a shorter letter, written simply, almost hurriedly. "If you read this," I wrote, "it means my story has reached where it needed to. And now it's your turn to keep writing, but without fear." This discovery spread like a whisper. The girl began reading the letter at school meetings, then at community events. Young and old listened to her in silence, as if they were listening to themselves. The text that was once a weapon became a bridge. And, for the first time, my story wasn't just about pain, it was about heritage. Even so, within the family, the discomfort persisted. The son tried to convince himself that time would erase everything, but time does not erase what is remembered by so many. The daughter, secretly, kept a copy of the letter inside her Bible. Not out of guilt, but out of faith. Perhaps she understood that some truths don't need to be read forever. It's enough to know that they exist. Some say that at night, the house still seems alive. That the wind enters through the cracks and moves the curtains as if someone were walking. That the smell of fresh coffee appears out of nowhere, and the sound of paper being turned echoes through the rooms. No one dares to say it's a haunting. Because what remains is not the ghost of the body, but of consciousness. And it's curious to realize how death doesn't erase the right voices. It multiplies them. They travel, settle in, transform those who listen. And the more time passes, the clearer my presence becomes. Not in photographs, nor in idealized memories, but in the unease. In the discomfort of someone who has finally learned that love without respect is merely disguised fear. The letter, they say, still exists. And there's something inside it that has never been revealed. A phrase, perhaps a secret. Something no one has dared to read aloud. And that's what makes me smile, knowing that even now, after everything, there's still one last silence waiting to be broken. That unread phrase began to take on a life of its own. Everyone talked about it, but no one dared to look at the last lines of the envelope. It was as if that small blank space held something that time was not yet ready to hear. The granddaughter carefully kept the paper, folded 3 times, inside a wooden box. And there, amidst the dust and the silence, the mystery grew. Some said that the content of that sentence would change everything, that it contained the confession of a family secret, perhaps even a name never spoken aloud. Others believed it was no secret at all, just a final lesson, written with the calm of someone who understands the weight of words. Be that as it may, uncertainty became part of the story, and that kept it alive. Because what is not said clearly continues to breathe within the listener. Over time, fear gave way to curiosity. The eldest daughter, who kept the copy in the Bible, began to open the book more frequently. She read random passages, searching for answers between the lines, trying to understand if there was anything that could redeem the past. But the Bible is like life. It never answers exactly, only with echoes. And sometimes, it is in the echo that we understand what the silence tried to hide. People in the neighborhood began to change the way they talked about me. What was once gossip turned into respect. The name Dona Eunice ceased to be remembered only for death and became synonymous with courage. Some neighbors began to tell their daughters, "Be like her, speak, even if no one listens." This silent transformation, born from exposed pain, made me understand something I didn't even know in life. Words, when born from suffering, become eternal. The granddaughter, now a teenager, began visiting the cemetery alone. She would bring white flowers and sit in silence, gazing at the cold marble with eyes full of questions. Sometimes, she would read excerpts from the letter in a low voice, as if waiting for an answer from the wind. And the wind would answer, moving the leaves, making the fabric of her dress dance slowly. She said she felt my presence there. And perhaps she did. Because there are bonds that not even death has the power to sever. One afternoon, at dusk, the sunlight pierced the clouds and fell directly onto the grave. A warm, golden glow, almost impossible to describe. The granddaughter closed her eyes and, for a moment, swore she heard my voice saying, "Now you understand." Perhaps it was imagination, perhaps it was memory. But the effect was real. The girl rose differently, as if she had received a legacy. Meanwhile, inside the house, the brother and sister finally reunited. The room was filled with a new silence, not of resentment, but of weariness. A kind of uncertain peace, like the interval between rain and sun. They sat facing each other, and for a long time, they said nothing. Until the daughter murmured, "Mother is still here, you know." He didn't answer, but his gaze, once hard, softened. That night, he went to her room. He opened the drawer where they still kept the old necklace, and for the first time, touched it with respect. It was strange to feel the absence so present. The air in the room seemed warmer, as if there was still breath there. The reflection in the mirror showed a man who no longer knew who he was. And for the first time, he cried without hiding it. Outside, the garden began to bloom again. The plants that had previously withered from neglect began to regain color. My granddaughter said it was me taking care of them, somehow. The neighbors smiled, and people started passing by the house more slowly again. The place that had once smelled of regret now seemed to hold a promise. And yet, that phrase was never read. It remains folded, waiting for the right moment. Some believe it was written to remain hidden. Others say it's precisely what keeps the house alive. Because there are truths that don't need to be spoken to exist, they only need to be felt. Sometimes the wind still blows through the open window and scatters the pages of the books on the table. The sound is light, but firm. It's the same sound that echoed when I wrote the letter. A reminder that the written word is like time. It doesn't return, but it transforms everything it touches. And there, between the weight of regret and the lightness of understanding, my story continues. Invisible, perhaps, but still in motion, waiting for the right moment for that last line, the one no one dared to read, to finally find its voice. Some say that time heals all wounds, but time doesn't erase what was truly said. It only changes the tone. The house, now quieter, seems to hold its own breath. The sound of the wind passing through the windows, the soft creaking of the floorboards, the murmur of memories that insist on remaining. It's as if every corner still holds the energy of everything that was lived there, not as pain, but as a refined memory. And somehow it's beautiful to know that even the wounds, when seen from afar, also shine. The granddaughter keeps coming back. Sometimes alone, sometimes with other women who have heard about the letter. They sit in the garden, around the old iron table, and read excerpts aloud. There are no tears, no speeches. Only the sound of words being released, one after another, with the same care with which they were written. The sun shines through the pages, and the light spreads across the paper, as if blessing each sentence. And, in that instant, I feel that my voice no longer belongs to me. It has become part of something greater, something that lives in each of them. The eldest daughter, previously so reserved, also began to write. At first, they were just loose notes, memories without order. But little by little, the words began to take shape, as if the inherited courage ran through her veins along with her blood. Today, she says she understands what I wanted to do, that my letter wasn't revenge, it was liberation. And that liberation sometimes requires someone to have the courage to break the silence first. His son is still the hardest to reach. But there are gestures that speak louder than apologies. One morning, he planted a tree in the yard. A small, fragile sapling, but full of life. He said it was for me. And when the wind rustles its leaves, his granddaughter says it sounds like I'm laughing. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, but present nonetheless. The unread phrase remains unread, but it's no longer a secret. It's a symbolic inheritance, a reminder of what remains open. Because life isn't made of answers, but of the courage to keep asking. And perhaps that was the letter's true purpose, to leave space for each person to find their own end, or their own new beginning. Today, when someone mentions my name, they do so with respect. Not the respect of absence, but the respect of the presence that taught, even in silence. And I like to think that each person who has heard my story carries a piece of it with them, a spark of strength, a whisper of dignity. That is why, when someone feels this impact and decides to leave a sign, a gesture of recognition, it is as if they light another light in this garden of voices that will no longer be silenced. The house now flourishes. The open windows let the scent of coffee mingle with that of the new flowers. The granddaughter laughs with her friends, and the sound echoes between the walls that once heard arguments, but now know peace. The past is not erased, it transforms into roots. And from those roots, stories are born. Perhaps this is what it means to live beyond the body, to let the truth continue to grow in those who hear it. My letter did not end at the funeral. It continues to be written in every heart that chooses courage over silence. In every woman who understands that dignity is not inherited, it is earned. And that's why, if you've made it this far, you may have felt something stirring within you. Perhaps you remembered a story, an injustice, a word you were never able to say. Don't ignore this call. Give voice to what needs to be heard. Share what touched you. Because that's how the truth stays alive, from mouth to mouth, from gesture to gesture, from heart to heart. Today, I am not just the woman from the letter. I am the echo of all those who were once silenced and finally chose to speak. And that is why my story doesn't end with a period. It ends with a breath, light and continuous, saying, write, speak, live, before time tries to silence you.